Hi BookTube and welcome to my final Friday reads of 2020. A couple of books by British authors on the subject of politics. That rare beast amongst British publishing. The first is For the Good Times by Scottish writer David Keenan, which is my first ever buddy read with Shawn The Book Maniac, and Carl Neville, Eminent Domain. So let's start with the Keenan. And this, it's about Northern Ireland and the Troubles. It's set in the mid to late 70s, and it opens with a sort of hallucinatory scene of the hunger strike, of a hunger striker in the Maze prison, who, as his body and brain are shutting down, is hallucinating. But the bulk of the book is centres around a gang of three guys who are violent. They have violent souls, and it's just lucky for them that they can sort of get away with that because they are sort of members of the IRA and are sent on missions and stuff. But they're very much sort of thugs, cowboys, gangsters. They're not very disciplined, and I think that's deliberately contrasts with the sort of discipline involved in maintaining a hunger strike all the way to death. And I assume the journey of this book would be how does someone get from a sort of, you know, freewheeling, anarchic, testosterone fueled sort of doing what you want guy to sort of someone doing it for a bigger cause, you know, of great discipline. But in fact that's not the journey of the book, but I'll get into that. So chapter 1 is very beguiling. I mean, I was totally drawn in by the style, the voice of the main character, the descriptions of what was happening, and you know, I was really into it. But there was definitely diminishing returns after that, for two distinct reasons. The first was we have a litany of violence and sexual assault in the book. Now, while that fits in with the subject matter, it gets a bit wearing because again it's just this sort of, you know, macho testosterone fueled thing front and central, which you don't need to keep reading about really. So that's the first thing, that I got quite ground down by that. But the second thing is he's writing about Northern Ireland and the situation there. There's lots of metaphors about nobody's quite who they seem, everyone has to disguise themselves. Sort of, he uses the notion of a masquerade where people have got masks. He uses the concept of alter egos where people are behaving as something they're not. You know, it could be someone who's pretending to be you know, a member of the IRA, but they're actually working for the British special branch or military intelligence, and equally it can be you know, someone on the other side pretending to be who they're not. So all of that makes sense, but he does it through non-realistic elements that flow throughout this book. So, for example, the gang of three are sent to claim some extortion money, or you know, what do they call it? Protection money from a comic shop, and the guy hasn't got the money and he flees. So they just take over the comic shop and use the proceeds from that to feed that back to the IRA. But the idea of sort of comics and superheroes is a constant sort of thread throughout here, as one of the characters is basically composing this sort of fantasy comic element as if they were the three guys with superheroes and take on this sort of great challenge to save the earth and stuff, which gets very, very tedious. There's another sort of magical realist or fantasy element where one of the guys is assassinated and they hold a séance to try and contact him, and they imagine that they're talking to him, which again for me just doesn't work. There's another character who's like an idiot savant who seems to have all the intelligence that the IRA need before even the IRA hierarchy are, but he's, you know, he's what was called in here a retard, but he comes up with all this stuff, and somehow he reaches into one of the characters' dreams and infects his dream. So there's all this otherworldly fantasy stuff which to me just undermines the reality and the realism. It just jars and weakens that point rather than makes it. So when he sticks to his subject matter, there's some really good insights into Northern Ireland. You know, I've read a lot of books on Northern Ireland and a lot of them are very bad, But this book actually gave me new insights and stuff. So, for example, this paragraph. It was a web of lies we were all caught in. It's the default position of the Irish. If in doubt, lie. If asked, make it up. If questioned, deny it. It had been drilled into us since we were all kids. Tell them fucking nothing. But it meant that every single relationship in your life was up for questioning. It meant that there were things you wouldn't ever even tell your own reflection. So when he's writing sort of is reined in like that and he's making observations, it's really good. But at other times, when he sort of goes off piece with all this other stuff, it wrecks it for me. And although the last two chapters, which are quite short, do bring into focus why he talks in terms of masquerade and alter egos, and you get this notion is that no one is who they really seem to be, by then he'd lost me. And I think what he's trying to suggest is that this nature of not really knowing where you stand, nobody's who they really are, nothing is what it quite seems, sort of put me in mind of the film Apocalypse Now. Now that was a film about Vietnam under the influence of drugs, that many of the soldiers fought it, while consuming drugs, be it heroin or be it LSD or whatever. And the whole film is shot in quite a hallucinatory way. I think this is similar, but without the actual drug input. It's trying to conjure up a sort of the situation there was so sort of hallucinatory that you could have elements of trying to reach out and commune with the dead through a séance. You did have sort of comic book sort of levels of reality, but I just didn't buy it really. And I was disappointed that we didn't seem to get that journey from anarchic male unchained egos to the sort of disciplined hunger striker. We didn't get that at all. So there was no real journey or progression throughout this book. There's one chapter in which they flee to the west coast of Scotland while the situation's got hot for them personally in Belfast. And Keenan is a Scottish writer. Now, without going into it too much, the west coast of Scotland is obsessed with the situation. Northern Ireland has the same Protestant and Catholic divides as Northern Ireland does. It just doesn't have the guns to accompany it. So you think, okay, well, this is going to be interesting. He's going to tell us about the Scottish dimension of the Northern Ireland situation, which doesn't get dealt with very often. But no, we just get there's no local colour. It could be back in Belfast or anywhere in the UK mainland. It's not specific to the west coast of Scotland, as offered here by Keenan. And also we just get again a litany of sex and violence. There's actually an orgy, or literally a sex orgy that then turns into an orgy of violence. And it's Quentin Tarantino-esque. It's like, the comedy that worked in chapter one because it was in sort of small doses because you'd only been exposed to a small part of the book. But by in a chapter like this, it's Tarantino-esque comedy derived from violence or sexual predation, which ain't funny ultimately. I didn't find the cartoonish violence funny. I'm not saying, of course, there was huge violence in Northern Ireland during that time, but it wasn't funny. If you ever watch any of the documentaries which you can see on YouTube with ex-IRA or ex-loyalist paramilitaries, these guys did not derive humour from the work that they did killing people or punishing people. These are fairly humorless guys, motivated by ideology and motivated by an end game in politics. So I just didn't buy it, I'm afraid. So although there were some good bits, as I say, ultimately I gave this 3 out of 5. And just a brief word on the buddy read itself. So I don't want to speak for Shawn. I'm sure he'll talk about the book in his own Friday reads. But I really, really enjoyed this read for 2 reasons, I think. One is I was so exasperated with the book after the first chapter. I think without having Shawn to bounce off, I would have gone mad. He helped me get through it. As you know, I'm not a bailer, but I said to Shawn, if I was 20% of the bailer he was, I would have quit on this book. It just drove me to distraction in places. So there was that aspect that Shawn got me through it. But actually, irrespective of that, we had a really good discussion of, you know, the situation in Northern Ireland. I sent Shawn some images of some of the mural art that pockmarked that period. But we just talked sort of around the book in terms of sort of wider themes and stuff, in a way that I found very stimulating. And also just, it was fun, you know. We learned some personal stuff about each other. I mean, nothing heavy or significant, but we learned some personal stuff about each other, which I think, you know, made us both laugh. So, yeah, as I say, I'll let Shawn speak for himself as to his thoughts on the book, but I don't think we were too far apart and our feelings about it. And on to Carl Neville. So I found this book on Twitter, which doesn't happen very often, where, you know, we're at December and people on Twitter announce what their book of the year is. And this was the book of the year of a small independent publisher in the UK called Influx Press. And he's very political, because I follow him on Twitter. He's very political about Brexit and Labour Party and Conservative Party and all that sort of stuff. So in a way, it's not surprising that he chose this book, because, as I say, it's a very rare beast, the British political novel. And this is sort of speculative alternative history in which the Russians do not collapse in 1987, the Soviet Empire, but actually they sort of win the Cold War, in the sense that all of Europe comes under their aegis, that all of Europe is communist and sort of becomes an internationalist single communist state. But it's not the communism of Stalin, that sort of bureaucratic, totalitarian communism. This is a much more democratic communism, which is sort of post-employment, leisure economy, although this book is about all the spies and spooks and agents and stuff they're obviously working. It's has environmental, you know, an environmental outlook, which certainly the old Soviet Union never did, and modern day China doesn't. So it is not sort of hardcore communism as we've known historically, but that doesn't mean Neville isn't above finding the flaws in it and the contradictions and the corruption. You know, he's very even-handed on that score. And the enemy of this communist bloc is America, which sort of remains free market capitalist, is ruled by a Trump-like president, who's very much sort of an anarchistic in his policies, just sort of wants to create order, sow sort of disorder and chaos and stuff. But the book's not really about the American side, other than sort of people who may be working on their behalf within the communist bloc. And it's told in very short chapters of 2 to 3 pages, which are mainly, each chapter is headed by the name of the character it refers to. Otherwise, it's a sort of a transcript of a conversation or a bit of historical report on something that's been outlawed or banned, or the history of revolutionary acts that got Britain, because it is set in Britain, to turn, you know, it's one of the last to turn communist, as it were. And it does it very successfully, because there's no sense of info done with this. It's really skillful world building, both the world that he builds and the way in which he builds it. So, you know, I'll give him a lot of praise for how he does that. The problem is that style of 2-3 pages at a time is not much happens in this book. There's very little plot. What there is that the UK, or the PRB, the People's Republic of Britain as it's become called, is very much sort of the outpost of this communist empire. And it goes its own way in as much as it can. It sort of flouts the rules as much as it can, which I think is an allusion to where Britain is today in a sort of post-Brexit, you know, in the Brexit world. That we don't want to be like anyone else. We want to go our own way. We don't have our liberties restricted as we see it. And there's an element of that, of the same Britain in here, which I think is quite interesting. But Britain the PRB is holding some sort of Olympic Games thing in which all the world is invited and contends. And there's a plot and a conspiracy that there's going to be some sort of terrorist attack on the games. And the week before the games happen, the director of the games, is assassinated. He's poisoned. And we get a group of people from all over the communist bloc who form a little squad to investigate and find out what lies behind it, what the nature of the greater plan is. And that's it. So it starts with this guy's murder. It ends with, a week later, is something going to happen at the Olympic Stadium, or is it going to be prevented? So not much happens. And a lot of this is, interrogations, debriefs and meetings between all these various characters trying to work out what's going on. And in only 3 pages, you would think that gives the novel pace, but it doesn't at all, because it's 450 pages covering a week's load of events, even seen through the eyes of lots of different characters as it is. And the structure, I felt, worked against this book. So as good as the world building is, the plotting is not terribly involving, and I think that was a problem for me. And I come back to as a piece of speculative fiction or alternative fiction, it's an interesting model of a sort of international socialist Europe or communist Europe, Britain's role in that, the relationship to America. But that's not where we are today. And apart from the UK going its own way within the limited room for manoeuvre it has, I couldn't see what the point of this was. What's it pointing to? Is it wishful thinking? Is it a wish that we had sort of gone down that route? It's all the stuff about a revolutionary Britain that in which the workers rise and get rid of the monarchy and all of that. You can't ever see it happening. It's, again, as I say, it's sort of, it may be wish fulfillment of the left, but it's so far removed from reality. So I couldn't quite see what this book, how it equates to today, except, as I say, this sort of almost pariah Britain, which is in there, but actually is only in there towards, I'd say, 2/3 of the way in. You suddenly sort of discover things on that line. So it was an easy read. I admired the world building, but I couldn't quite see what the point of it all was. So again, like this, I gave it 3 out of 5. So the state of the British political novel, we're still not there in terms of gripping, thought-provoking 5-star reads. So that's it. That's my final Friday Reads 2020. I am still reading, of course, but I'm not sure if I'll do a wrap-up of whatever I finish between now and the end of the year, other than I will be finishing my last Read More German lit of 2020 before the year end, and I will do a wrap-up of 2 German, that and another German book I haven't talked about yet, which I finished a while back. And then I'll do an overview and a wrap-up of all my Read More German lit 2020, which is for 15 titles in all. And then the other video I'll put out before the end of the year is going to be my top 10 reads of the year. It's going to be slightly different this year in that I have no book of the year. I have easily 10 top 10 reads, and they were all 5 stars, but each of them had some sort of flaw and drawback that meant I couldn't say definitively this is almost a perfect book in the way that I've been able to for the last 2 years. But this year that didn't happen. So I will give my top 10 books, and although I haven't sat down to film it yet, I don't think they're going to be in any order at all. So I don't think it's going to be a case of, oh, well, I just haven't got a top book of the year. I actually think it is literally going to be my 10 top, favourite reads of the year, but not in any specific order. Okay, so there will be a couple more videos before the year's out, but I'd like to take this opportunity to wish all my viewers a good, healthy, festive period, and here's to hopefully a more fulfilling 2021. Okay, till next time.